Good morning. How's everyone doing today? Thank you for coming out in the snow, and welcome to Teachers College. Who's ready to be an advocate? All right. Who's going to be ready by the end of the day to be an advocate? Good. My name is Matthew Camp. I'm Director of Government Relations here at Teachers College, and welcome. Thank you so much for everyone who helped put today's event together. Special thank you to Union Theological Seminary, our sponsors in this. Student Senate, Office of Diversity and Community Affairs, college events, Cure Lax, inspiration from Elaine Perlman and Melissa Mann, and thank you to our security, facilities, and catering staff. So about 3 years ago, I think it was November 2016-ish, a few TC students and I, including now Dr. Brittany Chambers, who's a facilitator with us today, and I got together to think about how to get involved in the democratic process. And we wanted to meet people where they're at, given that at Teachers College, students are everything from nutritionists, psychologists, teachers, of course, artists, and so no matter what people's role or title, we wanted to give opportunities to get involved. So what are some people's jobs? Anybody just shout it out? Just curious. Graphic designer. Mental health, great. Anybody else? Thank you. So to advocate, of course, means to speak out, so this is a really good start. So since that time, in those 3 years, some good things have happened. More teachers are running for office. Voter turnout is a little bit higher. Beyonce is still flawless, so that's good. But as we know, there are lots of problems that we're here to address. So what do institutions like ours, like TC and Union Theological, that are devoted to social justice, what do we do to sustain civic engagement and to be here for the long run? How do we put our money where our mouth is? Well, about a year ago, Ben Perry, who is the voice of Union Theological Seminary, and I got together to think about how our organizations could partner, and that's part of the reason why we're here. Another part of the reason why we're here, to quote Pericles, who said about 2,000 years ago, although you might not take an interest in politics, politics is going to take an interest in you. So the time for nonprofit, public service-facing organizations to just sit back and hope for the best is over. We face some serious challenges. Recently, Congress has proposed to tax graduate student stipends, boo, to eliminate public service loan forgiveness program, to remove the Johnson Amendment, which is actually kind of a separation between church and state, and its removal would really politicize churches and all nonprofit organizations, including colleges, whether they like it or not. And perhaps even more importantly, there are challenges towards the communities we serve. So there's egregious immigration policies, there's rampant sexism and racism, hostility towards the LGBT community. We're facing serious income inequality, climate change, and on and on. So what are we going to do about it? That's why we're here. We're going to advocate. So when you go to these workshops today, you're going to meet some really great facilitators. You're going to meet people who are experts in the field, and they're going to give you tools to advocate. We specifically asked them to think about the word educe, which is the root word of education, and to educe means to elicit and to bring out. So they're going to do a lot of listening and question asking in these workshops rather than lecturing. And they're going to harness the power in the room. They're going to harness your experiences and kind of guide you guys to be advocates. So when you step back out onto Broadway, you're going to be ready to go down to City Hall. You're going to be ready to go down to Albany. You're going to be ready to go down to Washington, D.C., and your voice will be heard. So thank you so much to our facilitators and for everyone here this morning. and I wanted to introduce an amazing advocate for the people of New York. Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer has been in public service for about 40 years. Gail is a constituents politician. She's out there at every event. If you haven't seen her at an event, you haven't been to any events. Gail's ubiquitous, standing up for New Yorkers, and we're just super thrilled to have her kick things off. Thank you, Gail.
Thank you very much, Matt, and it is an honor to be here to talk about this topic. It's a hard topic. There are people in the audience who know better than I do, and certainly at the workshops, what it means to be in public service, what it means to be inspired, what it means to get something done. It's a very strange time on the front page of the Daily News today, because I read the Daily News, the New York Post, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and then all the local papers. And the front page is AOC, who's an incredibly nice human being, for those of you who do or do not know her, saying that she's going to take on all the Democrats who are more middle of the road. So it's a hard time to figure out what works for the issues that we care about. I don't know the answer, but I can say that you have to, I think, as part of making a change and difference, you have to find people whom you want to work with and who are honest, who are transparent, who are inspirational to work with you. Because I'll be honest with you, in my profession, elected office, there are people who do cheat, there are people who are not transparent, and there are people who don't have the community as their bosses. They have themselves. And so you have to, as a change agent, I think, find people whom you want to be around you. I must admit, I was really happy that Jumaane Williams won, because he's an unusual elected official. We sat and worked together in the city council. I was the only sort of semi-citywide official who endorsed him. There were a lot of local officials, but I was the only semi-citywide. And he has an unusual characteristic, because he can sit and talk to people who agree or disagree with him. I give the example of the West Siders, because they're very opinionated. They're type A's, and they think they know everything. And he can talk to them intellectually, substantively, and personally, because I've seen it and I know it. And then at the same time, he can talk to the young people in the community. Obviously, when he was in the jail in Brooklyn, I never go to Brooklyn, I know it exists, but I know there's a jail there, and there was an issue with the heat. Apparently the heat's off again today. He was able to know the folks in that community. So me, I know the people on the street. I can walk down the street and the homeless people say, "Hi, Gail." Okay. But it's a different when you are working on those levels deep like Jumaane. To me, he's transparent, he is honest, he's inspirational, and he can go back and forth on those communities. But he's practical. He's not somebody who's gonna do pie in the sky knowing that something's not gonna work. So it is hard to find folks like that. I got my training from Ruth Messinger, whom this amazing man over here was the deputy borough president for. And she is the same, I think, open, community first, etc. So I guess the first thing I would say, and whether we're talking about advocacy, leadership, or whatever, you have to find those people to work with, because they are few and far between. And I don't know if it's getting better or getting worse. I don't know if campaign finance is helping or not. Certainly it only exists at the local level, so what would we know on the state and federal level? So that's the first thing. Second thing is, you need to find people who don't just pick one issue to work on. They need to have different things that they're interested in. I like the mayor, we work together. He's only interested in 3 things, right? Because you gotta be interested in the whole community, because the community has got so many aspects to it. And so you have to find people who, yes, have an expertise, because politically, mine is technology. I was chair of the tech committee. The next thing I'm going today to is a tech conference. So it's an unusual expertise for perhaps women in elected office, but that's what I'm passionate about, using technology to make government open to the people. So that's my interest. I know a little bit about housing, not as much as others, and so on, but the expertise I have is the tech world, civic tech. But there are so many other topics. So in order to make a difference, I think you need to have something that you know well, but you have to remember the whole community in terms of making a difference. The other thing you have to do is, whether you're an elected official or you are somebody who's building a constituency for the issue that you care about, you have to relate to all the different communities. You have to have a very broad base. Again, that's something that Jamani has, to be honest with you. So you have to have Latino revolutionaries, Orthodox Jews, immigrants, LGBTQ, women, and so on. Youth and seniors. Don't forget about those seniors. Oh, my God. The reason I mention that is a lot of people don't do that. They talk to one group, they are comfortable with one constituency, and they don't break outside of that. That's something that you have to work on. You have to get people's trust. I think you know that, but in order to be an advocate, in order to make a difference, particularly in a city like ours, Hillary Clinton messed that up because she didn't do that. She went and talked to the people she knew, and she didn't go beyond that. So I think you have to do that. You have to talk to parents and business people and artists and students. I can't tell you how many times they have different perspectives, and you have to figure out, some are going to respect what you're doing and some are not, but you have to stick to your values. What you can't do is this: where's the wind blowing? And then I'll go with that today and something else tomorrow. People don't respect that. If you stick to something and you have the reasons for it, you may not get the support of everybody, whether it's for your cause or elected office, but what they don't like is when you switch depending on whom you're talking to. That is a big problem. So all of this means you have to do your homework, you have to know if you're at a situation where there's something substantive. I can't tell you how many of my colleagues, they don't read the material before the presentation or the hearing or the conference. They don't ask good questions. They don't do follow-up, etc. And that's really a challenge because you have elected them to do that. That's their job, and they don't do it. So again, simply also, if you are on the advocacy side and you haven't done your homework and you haven't made a presentation, I know the community boards, for instance, and there are members here, spend a great deal of time looking at substantive issues in the community. And those who are most effective have done the research on the zoning, on the state liquor authority, et cetera, to see what exactly works, or something innovative on transportation and something innovative on ways in which the waterfront or the parks or the schools can be better positioned in the community. This takes time, and it's all about the homework. That's what public service means. It means doing your homework so that you can be effective and principled. I also think on the principled side, whether it is the attorney in an agency, the attorney in a nonprofit, the attorney somewhere else, the ethics laws are getting complicated, and you don't want to cross that line. I have a son who works in state government, and sometimes there's some things that I would say questionable in terms of what one as a young person is asked to do. Go to the attorney and find out if this is ethical or not, and even if it's borderline, don't do it. People step over that line. It's not just Mr. Cohen. What a wonderful, fun novella that was, watching him. But don't step over that line. So many people do, locally, state, and so on. So that's really important. I also say, I teach with Ruth, as Fred knows, at Hunter College. We meet with these students every Wednesday morning at 8 a.m. They don't like coming in so early. But what I have learned is, I don't know how to handle this because it sounds like a dated situation, but they have never opened a newspaper. There are 20 of them. They literally never opened a newspaper. These are really smart students. And they don't know what an op-ed is. They don't know what letters to the editor is. They don't know what an opinion piece is. They have no clue. One of them started buying the New York Times. I'm going to give her an A+. But the fact of the matter is, 2019 and beyond, how do we deal with the news and information? Yes, social media. I'm a biggest consumer of social media, but that doesn't get me the news that I want to know. So how do we deal with young people who have a different social media experience than I think we do in terms of being the consumer of the news? So I don't know the answer to that, but I can say to you that what's happening, and you know this, is that people are reading. When you read online, you just read the news that you're interested in. You don't read anybody else's opinion. When I open the newspaper, I happen to read the Post because I want to know what's going on. I see opposite perspectives because they're not mine, but I'm learning from them. Same thing in the Times. When you read the op-eds, it'll say this person is from Cato Institute or Heritage or whatever. I know that's not my perspective, but I read that, and then of course I'm going to read the perspectives that I am more comfortable with. How in the world do we get people to do that when you're only looking at something that's of interest to you? Because if you don't know the other side, then you don't know these other communities that I mentioned earlier, because they are often going to have different perspectives than we do. Boy, it's hard. I just want to talk. I think there's a lot of excitement about the women who ran and won in Washington, because I have to say those marches that we all participated in, I think were really effective. The only thing is we've been marching every single day since Trump got elected, and I could put like a cot at Foley Square. I might as well just move in there and sleep there because I have to be there almost every day. So I hope that all of that is going to get even more people who are not in this room, who might not ever come to this room, except that they feel so strongly about what's going on nationally. So I think, I came up in the 60s. I worked all the way back to John Lindsay when he was the mayor of the city of New York. I was at the Parks Department at that time. I've been in the state government, city government, been teaching for about 25 years. And I say that, progress is a sprint. It's not a relay. You have to be able to grab whatever, some kind of a stick, to be honest with you. You have to look around because you also have to pass the baton to somebody else. And I don't know that that's happening now. The stories in Washington are very challenging in terms of the division between the old guard and the new guard, and you have to be ready to accept it. I think you know how strongly I love interns more than I love my own children sometimes, because I feel so strongly about their excitement and their capacity to learn. And we have 16 to 17-year-olds on community boards, thanks to the city council and the state legislature, but it was my idea to try to do it. I think 16 to 17-year-olds should be able to vote in the city of New York. I think that would be an incredibly invigorating opportunity for them. They would be just as engaged, I think, or more so than others. So all of these challenges are ones that hopefully will be addressed today. The issues are absolutely mind-boggling. I mean, you have to, right now, some of the topics that we're dealing with are all the issues of making a green city and a green country and everything that goes with that. And you can say that, but implementing it is really hard. What do you do about the buildings, the cars, the streets, the food? The list is endless. Fossil fuels, nice word. What the hell does it mean in terms of every single day for people? All the issues with police transparency. It's so funny. On marijuana, there was a meeting recently where people were talking about the law, what it should be. You know who showed up? Hundreds of people who want to make money on cannabis. And the organizers of the conference were absolutely flabbergasted. But that would be an example of you have to talk to different people who have different interests. But if you're talking about those who are going to show up interested in making money, I believe the mayor is correct when he said it should be a local enterprise and not an international or national. Easier said than done, but that's another example. All the election reforms, I think it's fascinating that if we really have early voting, thank you, Robert Jackson and others for making it possible. But it's interesting, when I was at a church the other day, The pastor said that on Sunday, because of course this will be a weekend early voting, that he will take all the congregants and march to the poll. That's a great idea. That's an example of what a difference one law can make, not to mention making it easier for people. But again, you could talk a lot about election reform. Between the MTA, the Health and Hospitals Corporation, and NYCHA, they are all, and CUNY, I'm going to put in that list. These are all what I call authorities. I guess CUNY's not an authority, but it is in the sense of it's underfunded. It has the jewel of New York City as its backbone, but it's not been treated as such. So when you're talking about what are we doing, these are just 4 mega challenges that have not been addressed. They take advocacy, funding, policy, all the issues that I've tried to address. Education, I think you know that all of the challenges are there. Small businesses is something I've been working on for a long time. We're trying to come up with something to deal with the mom and pops, but at the same time, we're dealing with retail in transition because so many people buy online, so it's the rent or it's the buying online, but what's the streetscape, what's good for the neighborhood, what's good for the affordability of the supermarkets, and the list goes on. And I think the Amazon deal showed something a little bit different. Yes, coming, going. The real issue to me is you cannot make a decision in this city or anywhere else if you don't involve the community. It is always a better outcome. And I don't know why it's so hard to explain that to people. You know, if you ask people, we're reasonable. If somebody's not reasonable, on a local level, there are ways to find other reasonable people in the community or in the body politic to make the decisions. We're a big city. We have lots of people. Community has a good outcome no matter which community you speak to. They all want to be involved, and there are ways of making it better. So as somebody who's been doing this, as Matt said, for a very long time, I have perspective, but so does every single person in this room. And I think that what we're trying to say in 2019 is the issues are more complicated, but as I'm really obnoxious saying, or as I heard that in 1978, I'm likely to say that. But what we have to come up with are, for the issues that have been just hard to deal with, new faces, new ideas are always a good thing, but what's most important is as our communities get more diverse, it's even more important to ask people what they think and then try to get the funding and the support behind what gets concluded. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. I look forward to the discussions today.
So let's give it up again for our borough president, Gail Brewer. And I think they set me up to follow her. You're a truly very hard act to follow, but the borough president's been a friend for a very long time and a guiding hand in my life, so I want to thank her for all she does. Thank you, Gail. Yeah. So, thank you. So I'm Fred Davey. I'm the executive vice president over at Union Seminary across the street. And I want to thank Matt, who disappeared, oh, there you are, and Ben Perry, and I'll say more about him in a bit, for helping pull this day together. Ben asked me, in addition to, and I see Robin Reese, who is also from Union and who's our VP for Communications and Marketing. So Robin, thank you also for working with Ben and Matt to help make this happen. Ben asked me, in addition to bringing greetings from Union, to spend about 5 minutes talking about my own history and advocacy both inside and outside of government. So Gail mentioned that I've been Deputy Borough President under Ruth Messenger, which I was, but I started out in the city a long time ago, coming right from Yale Divinity School, working with faith-based and community organizations through the New York City Mission Society to do advocacy with those faith-based and community organizations on behalf of just fundamental community change. Now, this was back before some of you perhaps were even born, back in 1982, when the city was a very, very different place than it is now, where there were hollowed out neighborhoods, just blocks and blocks and blocks of abandoned buildings, where the murder rate was up to about 3,000 murders a year. The city was essentially broke. It was a very, very tough time. And I rolled out of Yale Divinity School, you know, with all the commitment in the world I was going to change it at least after 5 years. It was just going to be a very different place. I learned a lot of lessons. But I want to talk quickly about some successes as well. And one of the first ones, again, as a result of advocacy, bringing together labor unions and churches and community-based organizations, I was working with a group of churches out in Brooklyn. We modeled ourselves after the East Brooklyn congregations, which some of you may know about, Johnny Ray Youngblood and the whole Nehemiah program out there, where they transformed East New York. Well, in the part of Brooklyn I was in, which was Fort Greene, Clinton Hill, Prospect Heights, which are all like lovely places now, they weren't that way when I got there. And there were just loads of abandoned buildings that the city had taken in a process called in-rim, where if you didn't pay your taxes, the city took the buildings. And we advocated really, really strongly for the city to turn those buildings over to faith-based and community organizations to restore, to rehabilitate. And it took a lot of work. It took organizing people, Gail, to go sit in with Mayor Koch and Tony Gleitman, who was a housing commissioner, and we would find people who had contributed to elected officials, and we would go to their offices and we would say, you've got to get the city to do something about all these abandoned buildings in the neighborhood. And in the end, we did get the city to sell churches and community-based organizations a lot of those buildings for $1, and then to work with them to rehabilitate them. The unintended consequence of all of that was once they got some of those buildings developed in Prospect Heights and Crown Heights and other places, what happened? People got interested in the neighborhood, and what happened? Gentrification, right. So advocacy means not only then, in that case, ensuring that you get these buildings back on the market, rehabilitated for people to live in, but try to recognize what's going to happen with the market forces once you do that. And in this case, the market forces just followed the community organizing work that had been done. When I left sort of this nonprofit work for a period, and I went to work first in government as chief of staff to Carl McCall, who was then the president of the New York City Board of Education. And the advocates put a lot of pressure on the board at that time to do something about HIV/AIDS education and about multicultural education. Because AIDS was rampant in the city at that time. It was really affecting, as it does now, black and brown populations. And the Board of Education had 1 million kids within its purview, and the advocates felt that the board could do a lot in helping to educate kids about HIV/AIDS and then thus reduce the rates of infection. The churches went crazy. I'm an ordained Presbyterian minister. Many of my peers embarrassed me by how they opposed HIV/AIDS education, multicultural education, particularly as it focused on LGBTQ folks. But we worked closely in government. I did as chief of staff to the president of the Board of Education, the old Board of Education, to change how HIV/AIDS education and multicultural education were actually taught in the New York City school system. It's important to find people like Gail, people like me when I was on the inside, who are willing to work with you to actually change how government does something. In this case, it was a victory around making sure that kids were educated about HIV/AIDS and about multicultural education. I remember a big fight, headlines, Heather has 2 mommies. And people showed up. When we were when I was at the Board of Ed and we were dealing with changes in just basic education, nobody came. Board of Ed will implement a policy that has a book that says Heather has two mommies. People filled up the auditorium. They could have killed it, but for the fact we were able to work with advocates such as yourselves to ensure that those things got passed. Borough President's Office, when I was Deputy Borough President, a big issue then was the problems of struggles of black men and boys in New York. We worked with the late Walter Stafford, who was a professor at NYU, to come up with a policy for the Borough President's Office and how we would deal with black men and boys. I left government after being Deputy Borough President and went back into nonprofits. I went to the Ford Foundation and funded a lot of nonprofits to work on things like juvenile justice reform and alternatives for incarceration, but work with advocates to ensure in Boston and cities across the country that kids didn't end up in the criminal justice system with no way out. In fact, we worked hard on a number of diversionary programs. But again, it was advocates, churches, government, police departments all working together. I did the same, I'm embarrassed to say, but it worked with the Bush administration on prisoner reentry issues. We're again working with advocates in cities all around the country. We got one of the largest reentry programs, $20 million from the Bush administration to do prisoner reentry work in about 18 cities around the country. It became a very successful program, but only because we had people pushing the federal government to make this money available, and we had people advocating with local governments in those cities where we work to make money and resources available as well. We started a program called Ready for Work. You can Google it online. It talks about how we were successful in getting people coming right out of prison connected with jobs and keeping them in those jobs for long periods of time, thereby reducing the recidivism rate. I could go on. It is possible. I'll just say one more thing, and two more things, and then I'll stop. It's very important, as Gail said, to have more than one issue, but the intersectionality of issues is really, really very important. So, and I think people like Reverend Barber and others have come to understand that and are including that in their advocacy work. But after the sort of work that I did as a consultant of sorts with the Bush administration on reentry issues, the Obama folks picked that up and they started to pay attention to it, and I ended up working on Obama's campaign and then served on a White House council that worked with faith organizations and government. And I remember one of those meetings at the White House in the Roosevelt Room, and I was talking about the importance of faith institutions and government, but also the importance of making sure that, as Gail said, you work with everybody on all issues. And I remember saying, it's really important that as this administration, this new administration, considers its work with faith institutions and the community, that the faith institutions don't discriminate against LGBTQ people. And I remember an old warhorse of the civil rights movement, who's a great man, leaning across the table from me in the Roosevelt Room at the White House saying, "What is LGBTQ?" He had no idea. He had absolutely no idea. We spent a lot of time emphasizing the importance of the intersectionality of all these issues. You can't deal with one discrimination. You can't deal with one oppression. You can't deal with one societal issue and not in some ways address them all. And in many communities, you will find that these issues intersect in the lives of individual people that we are advocating on behalf of. Final thing. Gail knows that I somehow found myself involved with the Civilian Complaint Review Board, which is the city's oversight board for the police department. And last April, after being acting chair, the mayor appointed me chair of that board. Shortly after I became acting chair, advocates came to us, did presentations at our meetings, and they said to us, look, the police department is not investigating sufficiently sexual assault complaints by civilians against officers of the NYPD. Let me say, I have a great deal of respect for the officers of the NYPD. I have a great deal of respect for the work they do. They have very, very difficult jobs. But I also believe they should be fair in doing those jobs, and that there is an imbalance of power between the police department and the people they encounter. So the advocates were coming to us saying, look, the police department's not investigating sexual misconduct. So they testified, they talked to us off the record, they said, you all have to do something. The pressure, right? So we looked at the issue, did our research, Gail, did our homework, and as a board, we passed a policy change to say that it was within our jurisdiction as the oversight board for the police department to investigate sexual misconduct complaints against officers of the NYPD. We did our homework with the city's law department and said it's within the charter for us to do this oversight work. And the advocates insisted that we take this step. So we voted, we had a unanimous vote, even the police representatives on the board voted in favor of it. Well, the union sued us, the PBA sued us, and they sued us not only on that issue, but about 11 others. Well, I'm proud to say that last Thursday, the New York State Supreme Court affirmed our right to investigate misconduct complaints against the New York City Police Department. Advocacy. It was people standing before us at our hearings saying, you, the board, have to do something about this. We responded, and so far it looks like we're going to be able to do this job. I want to thank you all for coming out. I want to thank again the people for putting this together. I hope we can work with you as union in some ways. I hope some of you will consider coming to union for a degree. We think we have a great program there. People have been advocating us about our building project over there. As a result of that advocacy, we have now a $5 million public benefit program that's associated with our building work over there, and we're proud to have that public benefit to support community-based organizations in this community board. But I want to thank you for all the hard work you do. I hope you learn a lot today. I hope there's an opportunity to work with all of you in the future, and it's great to see you. Thanks. And let me introduce Ben Perry, who's the Deputy Director of Communications at Union and one of the organizers of this conference. Ben.
Hi, everyone. I'm Benjamin Perry. As Fred said, I'm the Deputy Director of Communications and Marketing at Union. Matthew Camp is far too kind. I am by no means the voice of Union, but I have a great privilege in my position to lift up the voices of an incredible number of prophetic speakers and to add my own voice to that inspirational chorus. And one of the things that is really important in any activism and advocacy is talking to other people. And so that's what we want to really make sure that we're doing throughout today. And so what I'm going to ask you to do right now is if you're sitting by yourself, can you just move towards somebody who's sitting near you so that you have somebody to talk to in a moment? I know. It's the worst. Asking you to talk to other people, it's early. So everybody has a partner. You're gonna have lots of time to talk in a second. I promise. Sorry, we're on a tight time schedule. Not really. So I've been thinking a lot about advocacy recently and how it runs so much deeper than protest marches and writing op-eds and writing your congressman. Not that those are not acts of advocacy. They absolutely are, and I encourage you to do all of them and more. But advocacy also works in just a million different ways in the ways that we interact with other members of our community to support folks and to hold up each other in love. I was reading Jose Antonio Vargas's wonderful memoir, Dear America, Notes of an Undocumented Citizen, which is incredible, and I highly recommend it. But I was really struck that in this book, here you have this guy who is, in his own right, an incredible public advocate for undocumented folks and migrants in general in this country. And he spends so much of his book, of his own memoir, talking about the way that other people advocated for him. So he talks about teachers in his high school who, when he didn't even know about the college applications process, not only told him that he should be applying to college, but helped him figure out how he was going to do that. He talks about parents of his high school friends who helped him get a driver's license, even though it was against the law. He talks about editors he worked with at the Washington Post who covered for him when they found out that he was undocumented and helped him to do his job and be successful in that job, even though they were in some ways acting against laws that they found were unjust. And so what I want you to do is take a moment, take 3 minutes or so, turn to the person next to you, and talk about the first time that somebody advocated for you. Maybe put one more. I'm gonna do 3, I think it's fine. Another 30 seconds. I'm just skipping way to the end. Okay, everyone, if you can take a moment to conclude your conversations. I promise you're going to have lots of other time to talk to everyone throughout the day. So one thing I want to ask all of you to think about throughout today is who are you here for? All of you came here for some reason. You woke up on a snowy morning, and you made it through the hell that is our train system, and you got here because you're driven to advocate for someone. Maybe it's yourself, maybe it's a community, maybe it's someone you love. But I really want you to think about, the issues you care about in terms of people. So for me, immigration is an issue I care a great deal about. But when I'm talking about it, I never talk about, I'm motivated because 256,000 people were deported last year, though that's true and it's awful. I don't talk about, the fact that politicians vilify migrants as criminals, even though, migrants commit crimes at lower rates than natural-born citizens, although that's true. But that's not the kind of story that moves people's hearts, and it's not the kind of story that motivates you to do the deep work. So I think instead about Edwin, a boy who's 7 or 8 years old who I met down in a refugee center in Texas, who, when I asked him what he hoped for, said that he only wished that he was welcome here. Or I think about a couple, Nordia and Miguel, who I married on a rooftop in Tijuana, who got married in part because they were worried that our government was going to steal their newborn child from them. These are the kind of stories that motivate you and that motivate others. And so what I'm going to ask you is, as you're taking a moment before we transition and go to our first facilitating workshops, if you feel so called, come down to the front here and just write, "I am here for," and whoever you're here for. And I hope you have a really wonderful day that's full of enriching learning and will empower you with all the tools you need to go out these doors at the end of the day and put some love into the world. Thank you so much.